Robin, over the last year plus of conversations, I've noticed something, and I'm just curious if you're seeing it too. A lot of leaders don't seem to be chasing the same things that they used to. They're not necessarily burned out anymore, but they are questioning what success even looks like now, today, as we're recording this. And so I just wanted to know from your perspective, what do you think is happening in the world of leaders and leadership?
Well, Neil, I feel like I'm seeing the same exact thing, man. And what stands out to me is this. Most of these leaders aren't losing passion. They're gaining perspective. But because the shift is an internal one, they don't know what to call it. So there's an internal shift taking place. And instead of saying, I'm maturing, they're quietly wondering, am I slowing down? Am I losing my edge? And I think that's the wrong question. I think what's really happening is that leadership at this stage of life starts to look different, Neil.
And Robin, I agree. And I know that as we were getting on here, we were talking about the topic, so we just hit record. I forgot to say, welcome to the Big Life Podcast. I'm Neal Oates Jr., my partner in progress, Mr. Robin Lewis. How are you doing today?
Hey, doing great, man.
Okay. So, Robin, we're not going to delay this. We're talking about how leadership looks different at this stage of life. And so we're going to go straight into naming that unspoken tension that you just mentioned. And so it's so interesting because I think a lot of people hear that and immediately our mind goes to this place. Immediately they wonder, okay, Robin, okay, Neal, but how do I know the difference between maturing as a leader and just settling, just, maybe just being accepting of what the market is throwing at us or what the world is throwing at us, what my coworkers or employees are throwing at us? How do I know maturing versus settling? Yes, I would love to get your perspective on that, Rob.
It's a very important distinction, I think, right? So let's talk about that for a little bit. I think settling comes from fear, first of all, right? Uncertainty and fear and doubt, whereas maturity comes from clarity, right? So that's an important distinction. I think when you're settling, you might be shrinking, you might be playing it small, you might be accepting. But when you're maturing, you're being selective. You stop chasing everything, not because you can't, but because you don't need to. And for many leaders, that selectivity feels a little uncomfortable because for years, it's been about hustle and growth. And we're looking at the scorecard and, checking that box off, right?
And I'm glad you made that distinction. So I just want to get clear. So it's not that the drive, the hustle, the momentum disappears. It's that I'm going to say, definition of winning changes. Do you think that's a reasonable or a right way to put it? So it's not that
Exactly.
we're not driven, but our definition of what winning looks like as the stages
Exactly.
of our life change.
I think that's exactly what we're saying here. And, the scorecard changes. And it changes before most leaders even realize that it did.
Okay, so now, Robin, I'm going to do my best Robin Lewis impersonation. And so you are the master of the reframe. So whenever we slow down and we look at something, you have this way of, let's reframe that. Let's not look at it as a loss. Let's look at it as a learning opportunity. It's not failure. It's an invitation, like you did with our last episode. And so I'm going to attempt to do this. And so I'm thinking about leaders who are listening right now who might say, if I'm not grinding like I used to, how do I stay relevant, right? I'm not doing all of this stuff. I'm not the first one in, last one out. I'm not up beating my chest. How do I stay sharp? So if they're coming from that place of, well, I feel like I'm less busy. I feel like I'm less important. How do I stay relevant? How do I stay sharp? What are you saying to them?
I think that's a real fear, first of all. I think you're describing something that people that are listening to us right now are experiencing. And I know I've been there. And it makes sense, right? But here's what I've learned through this process. At this stage, leadership, it isn't louder. It's clearer. You're not less hungry. You're just being more intentional. You start valuing margin because you've lived without margin.
Stop right there, Robin. Hold on. Now, I know we are quick to share personal experience. How tiring is it? So we've been chasing this thing. We've tried to get to the top, living without margin. What did that do to us?
Exactly. Exactly. And it leads to fatigue. It leads to burnout. It leads to limitations, actually, right? And we start choosing leverage because we've carried the weight. We know what the weight is of trying to do it ourselves and do it all, or everything having to come through us. Early in my career, success looked like momentum, and I'm not knocking momentum, but I now understand that I need momentum just as much as I need alignment. Success looks like alignment. And so momentum without alignment is we could be going in the with a whole lot of momentum going in the wrong direction, right? And so with alignment, that's where true success comes in.
That shift that you're talking about from momentum to alignment, I've felt it too. And so, since you were willing to share about early in your career, there was a point when I realized I didn't want more on my plate. Now, before that, it was Neal, could you, would you? The answer was like, yes, of course, I can do it. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. But then I realized I didn't want more on my plate. I wanted the right things on my plate. And that's where, if I'm hearing you clearly, you're talking about alignment more than momentum. You're talking about doing the right things more than doing more things.
Yes, sir. Right on. And you feel free to share more as we go along in regards to that. I know I've heard you talk about, for example, where you became very selective about clients, who you take on as clients and so on, right? And yeah, that's what we're talking about. You're still very intentional about serving and helping people, but you became selective about who that is, right?
So,
And so
Robin, let me jump in there. And I think this is where the leaders, our audience, if we aren't careful, we can think that saying no is a bad thing. We could say yes to everyone else around us and say no to ourselves. When the reality is, if we aren't saying yes to ourselves and our well being, there is this saying that I have been using probably for maybe 6 or 7 years now. We've all been told that we are the captain of the ship, right? And everyone gets on board. Well, I disagree with that. And so I do not believe that we are the captain of the ship. I believe that we are the ship itself. Right. And so sometimes, they say, well, the captain goes down with the ship. Well, that sounds foolish to me. Right. So if the ship is going down and I'm the captain, last resort, I'm getting off. I'll get another ship. But if I am the ship, if I go down, everyone else and everything else goes down with me. So, in an effort to save the ship, sometimes everything that is non essential must go. And once we get the ship back afloat, we will look at replacing those things or those people later on in life. And so, when it came to me getting the right things on my plate, Robin, you talked about choosing the right clientele. So there were good people or good opportunities that were not the right opportunities. And that's a key. That was a big shift in my life, in my business, and in my mind that freed me up to go from doing good work to doing great work and purposeful work. And that's what I want the audience to hear.
I'm glad you shared that, sir, because it's so true. That's it. That's the essence of what our listeners need to hear today. This stage of leadership moves you from being impressive to being more impactful, like what Neal just shared. So, Neal, I'd like to ask you, sir, let's talk about this from a generational standpoint, from where you sit. What do you think younger leaders misunderstand about this stage of leadership?
Well, first, I am honored by the fact that you would ask my opinion about younger leaders. And we're going to leave the interpretation of younger leaders up to you as a listener. But as I observe and as you and I work with leaders of different experience levels, so we're not just talking about age, it could just be their experience as a leader. I think a lot of younger leaders assume that this stage means you've lost ambition, right? But what I see is leaders who know what matters and what doesn't because they paid the price to learn it. Before we paid the price, everything matters, right? Everything is important, everything is urgent. But at this stage, we're saying, okay, that's all right, but it's not the priority. That right there is not a priority at all. And you just mentioned this idea about how being impressive versus impactful. Many young leaders think it's all about being impressive. Those who are more seasoned, those who have seen a few winters in their life, in the industry, in the economy. We're saying, I don't need to be impressive with my actions or my decisions. I need to be impactful. And I think the more that younger leaders can grab hold of that and realize that what this stage of life means, I think they're going to be better, as well as those that they lead, that, hey, we've paid the price to learn what it really looks like.
It's so true. That's such a good way to say it. That's a good way to put it, sir. I think this stage isn't about slowing down. It's about leading from depth. So you're getting more aligned with who you are and what your purpose is and what your calling is and what your giftings are. And you're getting clarity around who it is that you serve and how you serve them. And you're honing that and you're getting better at that. And so you're leading from more from a depth standpoint. It's not that you're slowing down. And it's less about accumulation and it's more about contribution. You're recognizing that you're not putting the attention on what you can get out of this, what I can get out of this is a better way for me to say it, but I'm putting more attention on how I can serve and how I can add value and how I can help others.
Robin, I do want to just expound upon that a little bit. We talk about accumulation versus contribution. And unfortunately, that is so countercultural today, right? And so it's not about me contributing, about me helping and making an impact. It has become about me, me, me. And as a leader, I have to take responsibility for those that I lead. How am I going to lead? Am I going to model out what contribution and a focus on contribution looks like to those around me, those beneath me? Or am I going to make it in this Instagram social media time about me, about showing the awards that I've received or the accolades that I have or the mentions and the tags on social media? Because unfortunately for our younger leaders, that's what they're seeing from those who are leading them. Right. And I think it's so key for our listeners here on the Big Life podcast to do what you remind us to do. And that's to ask honest questions. And so, what I would say, if someone's listening and they feel this shift happening, I want to know what's one thing you'd encourage them not to do. So, we're so quick to tell someone, here's what we offer. Here's my suggestion of things you could do to do. What's one thing you would encourage someone who's listening today? They're feeling that shift and this stage of leadership is changing. What's one thing you'd encourage them not to do today, Rob?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say don't fight this season. If you're in this season, don't fight it and don't compare yourself to who you were and don't compare yourself to what everyone else is posting. So be very careful about comparison to others or comparison to who you once were, right? So don't fight this season. Don't assume that quieter leadership means smaller leadership. This actually might be the most strategic, meaningful season that you've ever led from if you'll trust it. If you'll trust it. Neil, we talk about, for example, accumulation. We know a lot of people who have accumulated, but they have no sense of purpose. We know a lot of people that have accumulated that are living lives of dissatisfaction. We know a lot of people that have accumulated that aren't happy, right? And so this season is more about getting in tune with who you are and getting in tune with who you're serving and how you're serving them and how can you make an impact and giving yourself the time to really understand that and to think that through and so that you can move forward.
Robin, you mentioned on the outset of this episode talking about maturing, that we're not slowing down, and so now the entire idea we often think of maturing as getting bigger, better, but now we're not shrinking. We might be slowing down on the activities we're doing, but doing the right activities more. And this is forcing me today, as we have this conversation, to look and say, well, am I okay with that? Am I willing to mature and develop into a different person? Right. So, am I willing to go from the comfortable caterpillar? Am I willing to go in and do this thing and slow down or take these strategic steps necessary to become the butterfly or the moth? And so, I have to ask myself that as we have these conversations on a regular, because we get to have the conversation, then we go in and we edit the episode and then we listen to it when it comes out. So we have the blessing and the challenge of listening to our message numerous times. And so this is where I want to encourage you as the audience. Listen to this episode a number of times because I want to tell you this. Maybe the goal isn't to get back to where you were. Maybe that's not the goal. That's not what we are saying. We don't want you to say, well, hey, I need to get back to the hustle. I need to get back to the activity, just emotion. But maybe the goal is to fully step into who you're becoming. And I think that if you can step into that person, to who you're becoming with confidence, knowing that this season might look a little bit different, I think you're better for it. So before we go, I must kick it back over to my partner in progress, Robin. Thank you for this topic. Is there anything that you want to add or share with the audience before we get out of here today?
Yeah, I would just share that if you're at this stage of leadership, and I know it looks different, and that's not a problem. That might actually be the point of what we're trying to share today. And so sometimes we have to just step back and be aware and come from who we are and be authentic. And so that's what we're encouraging you to do to our listeners today. We need you. If we don't get you, the world misses out. And so we're talking about stepping back and pausing to come forward with the you that he's talking about. We need you.
We absolutely do. Here's what Robin and I need you to do if you found this episode of The Big Life valuable. Comment, share, like, most importantly, subscribe on whatever platform you listen to us on. Tap in with us. Let us know how The Big Life is impacting your life. We know that it is. Notice I didn't say if, I said how. So we know we're having a positive impact on you because we are doing the Lord's work. We want to remind you as we close this episode like we close every episode, and that is that we love you, God loves you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And until the next time we see you or you see us, we're right there with you. Peace.
Peace.